Hi, and welcome to this episode of the Data Revolution podcast. I'm Kate Carruthers, and this time we'll be talking about bi-modal data analytics. My guest today is Khaled Auf. I've known Khaled for years, and we've often chatted about the next big thing in data. And nowadays, the new big thing is AI, and it's super important to get your data architecture right. Khaled has worked extensively on corporate data strategies, having established over 20 data estate strategies across education, finance, energy, logistics, and construction sectors. His current day job is at Snowflake, where he is their practice director for professional services in Australia and New Zealand. Hi, Khaled.
Hey, Kate. Thanks so much for hosting me on this podcast.
I'm really delighted that we're finally getting to have this chat. So tell us about what this topic that we're going to talk about today is.
Excellent. So how about we start with the definition, right? And this terminology was coined by Gartner, I think in 2014, 16, quite a while back, right? And it's really interesting to see that not a lot of organizations have really, gotten it right this late in the game. So let's start with the definition. So bimodal, it's the practice of managing two separate but coherent styles of work. One focused on predictability, the other focused on exploration. So mode one is optimized for areas that are more predictable, well understood. Think your regular BI reporting, your enterprise reporting, everything your CFOs, CIOs, and executives need to look at on a day-to-day basis. It focuses on exploiting what's known while renovating the legacy environment into a state that is fit for a digital world. Mode two is the ones that we see most organizations typically struggle with, which is exploratory analytics. That is basically experimenting, right? To solve new problems, optimize for areas of uncertainty. And how you typically see organizations deal with that is they do MVPs, not most valuable players, minimum viable product approaches, right? Where they do little proof of concepts, little proof of values, to try to figure out how something new is working. And so both modes are essential to create a substantial value drive and to really propagate significant organizational change. And neither of them is static. Every time we build one of these architectures or build a data architecture in today's modern world, they come up with a new best practice and you have to really start all over again. So bimodal is essentially promoting an architecture or promoting a set of people, processes, and technology that can really focus on not just the optimized, predictable workloads, but to also have a methodology to be more exploratory and do those proof of values and minimum viable products.
So tell us about why we should care about this. Let's delve into that a bit, because at my place now, we're currently getting rid of our SQL data warehouse because we realized that when we started doing machine learning in production, we had to pull data out of the data warehouse and to feed our machine learning, and it was like, that's extra work. So we had to re-architect. So let's talk a bit about that.
Excellent. What that's one thing, right? And that's even delving into like a little bit tri-modal, and I'll talk about that in a while, but let's focus on, where can you see, or what are the typical, things that you really have to listen for to understand if you need bi-modal or not. There are a lot of organizations today where, you see shadow IT functions. So let's delve into that terminology. What does shadow IT really mean? What it really means is that, your classic IT infrastructure, your central data hub is unable to provide something to one of the departments. So what they do is they go and spin off their own little thing, the sometimes separate technology, sometimes, separate processes or people. And they do that because they're trying to solve a problem, essentially a proof of value. And so if you don't have something within your core data team, within your core data strategy that is tailored specifically for these proof of values, you will get shadow IT within an organization.
I don't like the word shadow IT because that actually implies that the people are doing something wrong and they're just trying to get their jobs done. I really don't approve of the term shadow IT, and I often stop our IT folks from using it.
That's an excellent way of looking at it. When you really delve into what Bi-Modal is trying to do, that's essentially what it's trying to say. It's trying to say these people, they're not evil, they're not, shadow IT or bad IT. They're trying to get their jobs done, and you need to figure out a way to keep them, within the broader ecosystem, the broader data strategy, and not treat them as outcasts, which is, typically what happens in today's world, right? They are seen as outcasts, at least by the IT organization.
Yeah, and the problem that I have with what the so-called shadow IT is they're kind of gifted amateurs at protecting their data, and they don't know what they're doing from a cybersecurity information security perspective. So there's a lot of data risk associated with it. So they're trying to solve a business problem, but they don't know what they don't know. And we need to kind of embrace them rather than shun them as shadow IT.
Correct, exactly. And so that's essentially it, right? When you've got a pattern associated with developing minimum viable product, not rigorous, but you build a minimum amount of security in that pattern. You build a minimum amount of data quality and governance in that pattern. And so whichever way you look at it, the outcome of having that as part of the central data strategy is it's more beneficial to the organization as a whole than to just let these divisions and departments go out and try to figure it out on their own, because typically these things they take kind of a back seat, right? They're really focused on getting their business outcomes, and they don't really delve too much or put too much focus on the things that we focus on for a living, like security and governance and data quality and all of these, really great things that are absolutely needed for the data set and output to become reliable.
So how would you say that an organization needs to go about having the ability to do their bog standard business intelligence stuff and do this innovation stuff? So what does it look like?
That's a great question. So if you look at everything that we do, it's not just technology, right? Technology is usually the easiest part of the puzzle, but there's a lot of people and process that comes into play when setting up a data architecture. And so if you've set up your data architecture and you don't have processes, that's where it starts, right? If you don't have processes that specifically define how to do these minimum viable product approaches, you're not going to really be rescued by just your technology, right? It needs to be something that you've thought of holistically. And so a typical process that we see, the tier one organizations that have really done a really good job at getting this right is to say, to do an MVP, you start with a data set that we don't know anything about. We vet that data set, we put it into a data zone within our enterprise data architecture. We give you access to that data set through our, approved front end, without naming tools, whatever that is. And then you can play around with it and you can create your minimum viable product. And when it's time for you to want to publish something, we'll even support you publishing that data set to the rest of the world.
I think we need to unpack that a bit, because implicit in what you just said is things like that there is a data catalog that they can look at and understand what's there that they can choose from, and that there's an appropriate security model over the top of the data so that they can't see things they're not supposed to. So let's unpack that a bit for folks.
Exactly. That's also really good. I mean, most of the time when you're looking at this exploratory analytics, right, it's not in its entirety new. So it's not a massive new CRM, for instance. That wouldn't really apply as exploratory BI. So they're usually using, let's say, 70% of the governed data sets that you've spent a lot of time articulating. You've got a well understood data dictionary. And again, this is all dreams for some organizations, but assuming that you've done that effort and you have a data dictionary and the users know what they're accessing, this is more really about, that extra 30%. So you've got this, little data set. It's not part of our enterprise analytics, and you want to marry it up to everything that you see in your day-to-day. And so all of these rules and regulations will apply if you build inside your architecture a way for them to import a data set that may not be 100% governed and secured from day one, but you'll also know that when you're publishing the MVP, because it'll be an MVP and it'll follow a different process that's less rigorous than a regular analytical use case would be. And sometimes we talk a lot about data quality and data catalogs, etc. But another thing that you typically see happening when you've created this second mode of operating is the data set would go all the way from zero to hero, and the end users would simply not use it because the result of this minimum viable product is we don't actually need it. And so if you think about the time that you've saved for all these the poor IT folks that would have spent months and months curating this and figuring out what the usage would look like and figuring out what the security would look like and putting it into the system. And then at the end of all of that effort, the business users go, all right, thanks for doing that. We've actually realized that we don't need this.
So I've just really I've had a weird visual pop into my head. So really the innovation comes first and the operational mode comes second. Realistically, that's how you're getting good quality inputs so that things turn into sort of your business as usual.
Correct. And we're following the business. Any process that you put into place where you're trying to get the business to follow the IT, it just typically doesn't go well, right? Because the business, they want to be operating at their pace. They've got objectives, they've got, targets that they have to meet, and they're just going to need something quicker than a 6-month deployment process that's led by IT.
Yeah, so you remember those bad old days with the old IT waterfall projects that went for 2 years and then someone threw something over the fence and nobody wanted it anymore. But how about for some of the less mature organizations that don't have a lot of this, that might be wanting to start out? What sort of things do you think they should be looking at doing?
I mean, I think there's no real organization that I've seen that's too small to set a process up, Kate. Like, unless you can tell me with a great deal of faith that you don't have any users that are, bringing data sets together in Excel, using all types of VLOOKUP functions to come up with some new data set, then maybe if you can attest to that and you can say, oh, my organization doesn't do that at all, everything's highly regulated and we don't need to do that, then maybe you don't need that type of MVP process. But for the majority of customers across the entire span of how large and small you can be, you at least need a process that really helps people innovate and helps people experiment, with giving them some governance, of course, but still gives them some exploratory analytics.
Yeah, I think we did some work together a couple of years ago, and that led to us setting up a working group for our main users. And they basically bring us all of their Excel spreadsheets that they cobble together from various CSVs, and we automate those. And, that's been a really reliable source of new business for us for a long time. But it was funny when we had that realization that we could actually improve productivity in the business by just saying, we'll automate that for you. Stop spending hours a week trying to do this yourself.
Yeah, I mean, again, I take this as a point of pride for sure, but I think you were the very first customer that actually productionized in Australia that exploratory BI by having a zone, I remember, in the data lake, and then asking your users to use that zone, etc. But it really, it does wonders because you don't feel like an enemy to the rest of the departments anymore, and they can see that you're transforming and trying to, help them with all of their use cases, not just the enterprise ones.
Yeah. Hey, so now, but we've talked a lot about the benefits and some of the stuff that we ought to think about. What about some of the risks around this stuff?
Oh, yes. Well, everything comes with inherent risks, right? If you're bringing in a zone and asking users or telling users to put, their unclassified, unvetted data in there, and then propagating a deployment model as well, for them to actually deploy the results of these experiments. One of the risks is if you are not very, very careful about how you classify data sets and how you classify reports, an end user that is unknowing of the fact that this is a proof of value can look at some of these numbers and make a decision because it's coming out of IT, it's coming out of their analytical system. And so you could get a lot of blowback related to, hey, this report is on our
kind of
website.
Experimental. So you need things like bright pink headers on things.
Something like that. Yeah, but what if somebody removes the bright pink header and replaces it with the UNSW logo? So you've always got these risks that you need to really be careful around as well.
Yeah. So I think though that some of the risk would be also in the need for the cyber and information security protection for stuff. And I think you kind of touched on it with the need for classification of understanding what data we want to be, publicly available, what stuff we want to be confidential, and having those regimes set up that you can overlay onto your data and the data outputs.
100%. And again, that's one of the benefits of having that type of process within core IT, because we're heading towards a direction in the new world where classification algorithms are second nature part of the architecture. They can go in and automatically find where all the PII data is in the entirety of your data set. They classify it by themselves. They tell you about it. There are a lot of tools that do that now in each of the data ecosystems, whether you're using Microsoft, Google, or Amazon. And so when you're propagating that data discovery into the core IT system, if you've got tools and processes in place that identify, classified data sets, they'll also be able to have access to that data and they'll be able to warn you, hey, watch out, this actually has some PII data in it. But if you leave everything outside, or if you leave those exploratory use cases outside of your enterprise analytical platform, you're not going to get that warning, and you don't know what's going to happen with the data, which is really dangerous.
So that's the big sell point for Bi-Modal, isn't it? Because it's part of your overall architecture, it's happening in a planned and structured way, and it's not just out there on its own. And you get the benefits of sort of enterprise approach, which seems to me to be the biggest benefit. You touched on tri-modal. What the hell's tri-modal?
Well, like you said at the beginning, right? Like with AI coming in to the picture and all of these new patterns that are constantly evolving, one of the patterns that I'm sure you realized as well early on in your career is, after we'd established everything and we have this exploratory BI and everything's working pretty well, we had data science, this data science blow up essentially that happened a couple of years ago. And after we've curated, so
long ago now.
Yeah, it is, right? And after we'd curated everything and we were 100% confident that this is it, we've got our architecture really well lined up. Data scientists came in and started saying, okay, thanks for curating all of this. We don't actually want any of that. So could you please give us access to all your raw data and all your...
Well, no. So we had a different experience. So we thought that they would want the raw data, the data scientists, and we gave them the raw data and they were like, we don't understand this. So they wanted it semi-structured. So, they wanted things like where things had weird codes on them, alphanumeric codes. They wanted them categorized into, this is a category of things with a name, so that they knew what it was. So we've gone with a proper bronze, silver, gold architecture now.
Yep.
So we give our data science people access to the silver. So it's just up from raw, but it's not yet gold. So that's a kind of approach that we've gone with. But yeah, they didn't want raw data. They were like, we don't understand what this means.
Yeah, that's, you'll get different breeds and methodologies with the data scientists, but, they essentially forced us to rethink our, initial strategy of gold is the only real access layer that we're going to give access to people to. And so, they wanted the system of record, direct access to the system of record. Everything that system of record is performance tuned and doesn't need somebody doing a select all on every table twice a day just for the fun of it, right? And so these data lakes and data repositories became the best place for them to really go in and do their exploration. And so we had to rethink and create essentially a third mode of, okay, what are we going to do with data scientists? What's our strategy?
So is there going to be, are we going to go quad-modal when we bring
Yeah, potentially, right? Exactly. And so that's, with AI, organizing your data assets is going to become like so important. It is essentially what is going to differentiate one organization that has AI use cases to another organization that's got the same use cases, but is just not ready to implement on it because they don't have their ducks in a row, they don't have a proper data strategy, and they don't have an architecture that really promotes, one unified store or one unified place where all of this data exists, so that if you're building something in the AI world, in the LLM world, you have the data that readily available. And so potentially, yes, something that we're going to have to rethink again, maybe another topic for another day on your podcast.
Oh, yeah, because, I think a lot of people are starting to think about this. And sure, we've got to get everything lined up. But we had a vendor do a demo and a talk for our senior leadership the other day, earlier this week. And the thought of it was just horrifying for me, because it was just like, we don't want to let these people loose to run up their own instances, because the cost will blow out. They'll be using the wrong data. They won't, so we need to do some sort of centralized approach. And the other thing now is data quality just becomes such an important issue. So
exactly, because LLMs, it depends on which LLM model you're going to be using. Are you going to be, training it or using one of the pre-made LLMs that we see available now?
Well, all of the above. But the thing that I keep saying to people is an LLM can only know what an LLM knows. So a large language model only knows what's in it. And it can't know anything external to it. So you're going to have to put a layer of something like cognitive services. And there was one application that I was talking today with someone about and saying, I think we're going to need a layer of faceted search across that too. So these things, LLMs are not going to solve our problems. We're going to have to put together stacks of technology to answer our questions. So I don't think a lot of people are understanding that just yet, but they'll work it out.
Me included, right? I'm also, I haven't kind of wrapped my head around how we're going to commercialize this and how we're really going to give them access to this data, because one ideology or one methodology is to give access to the LLM and then ask it to explore, but not add that to its training, right? Just, it's already trained, it's already a model. Have a look at this, and now I'm going to ask you a bunch of questions. And then there are others that say, look, for specific use cases, that's not going to be enough. We're going to need to do a little bit of training or adjustment to the model to get it to behave properly. And so it's still a very wide topic, and lots of different options. And it's something that we're really going to need to get our heads around as data officers or CDOs or technical leaders of any sort.
Yeah. Well, the thing that I keep telling people is in this space, in the data space, things used to move in years and months, and now they're moving in days and minutes.
Correct.
And I'm keeping up with what I can, but the changes are coming so thick and fast. So it's going to be interesting seeing how we all adjust to this. But it's a good time to be alive. It's fun.
Absolutely. Definitely exciting times, and lots of reading, and
lots of homework for both
fun.
of us. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me today, Khaled. I really enjoyed our chat. Thanks for joining us on the podcast too, folks. Don't forget to like and give a positive review. It does help. Thanks for listening. And that is it for another episode of the Data Revolution podcast. I'm Kate Carruthers. Thank you so much for listening. Please don't forget to give the show a nice review and a like on your podcast app of choice. See you next time.